You may very well have noticed on here that I get a little bit defensive when characters I think that they are going in a direction that I don't think is accurate to them, that I don't think is good for them, and that I get defensive when I see that a character I like might be getting into a relationship that is forced, and that I might feel a little threatened that that is going to wreck that character. We just talked about that in several videos recently, but I want to make this video to explain myself, why I'm so defensive when it comes to bad relationships infecting characters, and how these sorts of bad relationships that are forced into narratives, or just honestly the writer's fetish, slipping into narratives, slipping into movies, slipping into comics, whatever it may be, how these relationships have been popping up more than ever lately, and or at least in the last 10 years or so, and why it is a detrimental thing for writing your story, and why it is a detrimental thing to these properties that I'm going to talk about. And it's a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and something that is probably long overdue for a rant or a discussion. But I am very curious if you've had it yourself, if you've had movies and TV shows or comics or books or whatever where a writer slipped in a bad relationship or a forced relationship and it ruined that story for you. But before we get into that, I guess I should explain where I'm coming from and what kinds of bad forced relationships I'm even talking about. Well, once again, I've had this problem more than once, and it's happened when I'm really invested in a series, and that a bad forced relationship will just destroy characters because somebody wanted to force that so bad. But let's go back. Let's start with my PTSD. Let's start with my trauma about how this whole bad relationship thing that I've noticed got started, and why these self-insert relationships got started, and why I am so defensive against it. But let us go back to the beginning. Let me tell you all a story. Let's start with the patient zero of it all, when this entire thing that I've been noticing, these self-insert relationships, these relationships that are bad but are forced into storytelling at all costs. Let's start with the patient zero of it all, when it all got started, when I first started noting it. A film called Avengers: Age of Ultron. Now, to get into this story, we're going to need to preface this a little bit and give a little context. Now, when I first got into the Avengers, I loved Black Widow. My favorite characters were Iron Man and Black Widow, but I was really invested in the story of Black Widow. I thought that she was great in the first Avengers, and I thought that she had stellar storytelling in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And what really drew me to this character is the mystique around her, and how she had this dark past that she kept very mysterious, but it was well known that she had done terrible things in the past, that she had been a terrible person, and that she wanted to escape that. Winter Soldier, as it was wrestling with questions of morality, really explored that character, how it seemed that she hadn't changed from who she really was in the past, how she was doing the same things, doing the same bad things, telling the same lies. She was just telling them for different people now. And it was very interesting for a character who's supposed to be a hero to see them grapple with that. And with her arc in Winter Soldier, there was a lot of questions about who she would be going forward. Like now, as it was said in an interview with Scarlett Johansson, she was going to start making decisions about how to be more active in her decision making and doing things for good. She wasn't just going to be a puppet of somebody else. She was going to be more active in wanting to do stuff for good now. And so I was really invested in that story and seeing where she would go in Age of Ultron. And what should also be noted is Black Widow was a very serious character. Like in Winter Soldier, we got more of a sense of humor out of her, but she was a very serious character. She was a tough as nails character, and I really liked all those aspects about her, and I was really invested in seeing where her story would go. Boy, oh boy, was I surprised. Now, it should also be noted that at this time, people were kind of wondering, is Black Widow going to get a love interest? Does she need a love interest? She had several in the comics. Hawkeye was one of them. Captain America from an alternate universe, Daredevil, Winter Soldier. There'd been a lot of love interest for this character, so it was kind of wondering if she would get one or not. A lot of people thought it would be Hawkeye. Guess how that turned out? Some other people thought it should be Captain America, but they chose not to go in that direction. And while I don't think that she should have been in a relationship with Captain America, I should note it's at least understandable why some people thought that, because Scarlett Johansson and Chris Evans had a lot of chemistry, and that's important to note. So we get to Age of Ultron, and what we get is not a story about a Black Widow trying to do things for good. No, it's not a story about her developing a relationship with anyone who she's had a lot of chemistry with or spent a lot of time with. It's about her throwing herself at Bruce Banner. What? Now, this, I can't stress enough. This came absolutely out of nowhere, like nothing in a TV series or a movie series or whatever it may be had come out of nowhere for me before. It was like, what is that? Like, Black Widow and Hulk had a completely different relationship in the Avengers. And mind you, these are, as a fan of these series, I'm really, really going over the fan theories, and everyone's talking about the character dynamics and the development and where it was going to lead. And no one ever said that Bruce and Natasha would be in a relationship for a couple reasons. First of all, that wasn't their dynamic at all. Black Widow was afraid of the Hulk. She didn't trust him, and Hulk didn't trust Natasha. He didn't want to kill her, just like Bruce Banner doesn't want to kill anyone. She was completely unsuccessful in calming him down. But basically, that was their dynamic. It was one of fear and distrust. When we get to the end of the movie, it seemed that they were just merely on speaking terms. But now they're not only in a relationship, but Black Widow is just throwing herself at him in every way that she can, and everybody in the movie is trying to confirm this relationship. Oh, isn't it so nice for Bruce and Natasha? Can't you see how wonderful this is? Rule number one, if you have to have other characters try to say how great a relationship is or how obvious it is, that's bad writing. That means you have to have these other characters be your spokesperson to try to convince people that this is happening naturally when it's not. But what's so bad about the Black Widow-Hulk relationship is, for one thing, how random it is, but because even if it wasn't random, these characters do not work together whatsoever, and because they have no natural chemistry, if there was natural chemistry between them, we would have seen that in the first movie. For example, they didn't intend for Clint and Natasha to be in a relationship as they are in the comics, and they didn't intend for Natasha and Captain America to be in a relationship either, but those actors have natural chemistry, so despite that, there were people clamoring on saying that maybe these characters should be in a relationship because that actor and actress pairing had natural chemistry. Scarlett Johansson and Mark Ruffalo didn't have that, and that's why nobody ever thought that they would be a thing, because there was nothing on the screen that would remotely or in the writing that would remotely suggest that. When the romance between the two came out, there were MCU fans retroactively trying to say, no, you just weren't paying attention. This thing was there all along, even though literally no one noted it until they did it in this movie. And even though the actors and the director behind the scenes confirmed that they did not make the Avengers with any intention of these characters being a thing, and that Scarlett Johansson herself came up to Joss Whedon and was like, I don't think this makes any sense for the characters, but he didn't listen. What happened behind the scenes apparently is when writing Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon really got it into his head that Black Widow and Hulk should be a thing, that he was doing a story where Black Widow would be helping him with his control, which makes no sense because I thought his character arc in the first Avengers was all about him gaining control, and that he just really got into the idea of these two characters being a thing, and so he did what he could to make that happen, even though Scarlett Johansson told him this doesn't make any sense. Apparently, no one could tell him no on that, and apparently, the excuse for their relationship and their connection in the movie is apparently they both see each other as monsters, because Bruce Banner is a pacifist who doesn't want to fight, who has a rage monster inside of him that comes out against his will when he gets too excited, and then Black Widow is somebody who was groomed and used by her government to become a super spy and has killed people. First of all, that makes no sense. Black Widow, even though she did not choose her upbringing, just like no one does, she did become a legitimately bad person. That's the whole point of her character, that she was groomed. Even if she was groomed into it, she did become a bad person. She was willing to kill. She had done awful things even on her way out of her country. She still does awful things even as she thought she was on the right side.
I made a name for myself. I have a very specific skill set. I didn't care who I used it for. Or on.
Look, I didn't want you doing anything you weren't comfortable with. Agent Romanoff is comfortable with everything.
When I first joined S.H.I.E.L.D., I thought I was going straight. But I guess I just traded in the KGB for Hydra. I thought I knew whose lies I was telling, but I guess I can't tell the difference anymore.
Bruce Banner is somebody who has a lot of pent-up trauma. I know they never explore this in the movies, who comes out in the form of a rage monster, and he needs to learn how to use that rage monster. He has never been a bad person, though. These are completely different set of circumstances. The only parallels you can draw between them are parallels that you could draw from any of the Avengers characters. Characters who have regrets, who've gotten people inadvertently killed, who have demons to deal with. It's all the same sort of thematic thing that all superheroes deal with. But importantly, I've learned this over the years of reading and watching media. I've learned that the most important thing when pairing two characters together closely or romantically is not if they have something in common, just anything that you can draw a parallel to that they might have in common. You need to have chemistry between those two characters. If they just do not have, and when you have romantic chemistry, sometimes they don't even need to have anything in common. But if you have two characters with no inherent chemistry and you're desperately trying to put them together and try to draw parallels, it's not going to work. And that's the big problem with Age of Ultron. It didn't work because these characters, it wasn't natural to them. So this is the point that I'm getting to. The characters had to be changed in order to make it work. Black Widow, after being this very, very, tough as nails character, a very dangerous character, a very mysterious character, all of a sudden was what I can only describe as sort of like a high school girlfriend. Like she's like the high school cheerleader hitting on the nerdy boy, and that's what happened with Mark Ruffalo's character. Mark Ruffalo as Hulk is the best adaptation of the character I've ever seen. He was cynical. He was very seasoned. He had good in him, but he was also very jaded in more ways than one. Bruce Banner in Age of Ultron, this is the start of like silly Bruce Banner, where he became just more of a silly idiot nerd. Like, some people say that started in Ragnarok. I saw it starting back in Age of Ultron, and it started with this romance that they had to force together. Black Widow, for all intensive purposes, just became Betty Ross. All of a sudden, she's really personable and open. I mean, we also see that in the movie with the way she treats Clint's family, where she's got this Auntie Nat persona. Let's just call Black Widow in this movie Auntie Nat. That's who she is now. She, once again, is very open. There's not just a humorous and flirtatious side of her. She just seems like that jadedness has completely gone away, and not because she dealt with it, because she needs to be a completely different character in this movie. This movie effectively, I think, killed the mystique of Black Widow, because we got to hear at least as much as they wanted us to know of her past, with her wanting to have a family and all of that, and that part was fine, but it was all in relation to Bruce Banner. She was no longer a mysterious character after this movie. It was all revealed. We apparently see who she really is, and it's a completely different character. But importantly, remember I said I was really invested in her because I thought Black Widow was going to go on a journey to actually proactively be a hero now, actually try to do the right thing. And here we see she wants to run off with Bruce Banner all of a sudden. That part got me bad. Like, now she wants to run off with Bruce Banner, a character she has no chemistry with and has had no positive history with. We're all of a sudden thrust into this romance, and we're all of a sudden supposed to be invested in these two running away together and starting a family. Why? We're supposed to believe that Black Widow, who has no problem murdering people even as she tries to be a hero, is the calming force in Bruce Banner's life. We're supposed to believe that Nick Fury, as he's trying to save the world from total destruction, was playing matchmaker with Bruce Banner and Natasha, who he didn't trust in the first movie, which is why he had a containment to try to take care of the Hulk. Joss, why? You just have to wonder with these sorts of things, like, why did Joss Whedon have to do this relationship? I don't understand. What I also don't understand is, why did nobody on the set of Age of Ultron, why didn't Kevin Feige say, no, Joss, we did the Avengers, we didn't do that relationship, it's gonna come out of nowhere to the audience, we're not doing that, we need to come up with something else. Why did Joss have to put this relationship in the movie? Especially as things were gonna get so cluttered moving forward, they probably knew they couldn't do much with it, but they ended up derailing both of these characters and their story because of it. I didn't realize this before. Some people said that this was Joss Whedon's self-insert romance because he really likes the Beauty and the Beast thing, that this was a ploy of. Maybe it was. Maybe that's what was going on with it. Joss Whedon turned out not to be the best guy in real life. But what I'm trying to get through here is how it affected me in trying to enjoy the MCU, because before I was really invested and cared about all these character building and the development and all that, and even a poor movie like Thor the Dark World would build on it. But Age of Ultron nearly killed the illusion of the MCU for me. Like, for more than one reason it did that. We haven't gone over into the other flaws in the film, but for me it's not about getting a flawed film. It's about all of a sudden having these characters you knew or you thought you knew derailed. All of a sudden, everything you could know about a character like Black Widow just being uprooted because somebody wanted to push their weird self-insert relationship, whatever it is. When I say kill the illusion, I mean when you get into a story, you're immersing yourself in this world. You know it's fake, but you're trying to believe in the illusion of this world, and a level of consistency is necessary for that. But what took me out of it is going like, everything I know about these characters could be uprooted in a second because somebody has their weird ship that they want to push or their weird element that they want to push, and they don't care about retconning in order to do it. And I mean, that's always possible for somebody to do, but, you would usually expect there to be a little bit more integrity of not doing that and realizing this would be completely random, and that's why it was such a big problem to me. And I eventually came back around to the MCU, and my hype came up with it again with Black Panther and Infinity War and whatnot, but it never really came back for Black Widow or Hulk, because Black Widow never really came back. They tried to have her personality a bit more back to normal once the Russos got back on board with her, but that was really the last chance of really exploring her character before Endgame and all of that, because there were so many characters and so many plot lines, she kind of just got lost. So she was never really repaired, and so to this day, that is like a big thing for me. Like, they destroyed the story of this character over this bad relationship. It was like halted in the middle of it and couldn't go forward properly because they didn't have enough time to fix it if they could. And it really affected me, thinking I would never want to do that if I was working on a project. I would never want to disrupt anyone's enjoyment or immersion of this just over a bad relationship. But we're not done yet, because in the years to follow, there would be more bad relationships that would crop up in media, that would be forced, that would ruin characters. For they were all of them deceived. For other bad relationships were made. Before we go forward, though, I want to acknowledge something. Like, is part of this, like, my investment that I was really, really invested in, for example, Black Widow, and that is why that part of the movie affected me in a negative way more than it would other people? I think so. Like, for example, there's other bad relationships we can get into, things that were forced, and it doesn't always have to be something that comes out of nowhere. Like, I remember when the show Arrow was coming out, so many people were mad that Olicity, that ship was being pushed so far, they felt to the detriment of the show and the adaptation it was supposed to be of the Green Arrow comics. I wouldn't know a lot about that because I didn't watch that show. I just mainly followed the drama around it. That would be an example of a relationship that was being pushed, though, more because they wanted to please shippers and all of that kind of thing. So it can happen outside of it. It doesn't have to be from a writer from the inside. It can be because of shippers from the outside. Another example of that, a weird, random, bad relationship would be, once again, we've said it before, Kylo and Rey from Star Wars. I mean, I kind of saw it coming. I remember when it was happening in The Last Jedi, I'm like, oh no, you didn't do that, did you? I mean, it could happen, but the setup for it was pretty messed up, and like, why would you want to see these characters together? And it was really awkward and forced the way they did it. I don't really care about it, though, and like, it could just, this is once again talking about the subjective aspect of it. I really cared about the characters of Black Widow and Hulk, and that's why it really just took me out of it that they did that, because it's like, I want to be invested in this universe still, but I don't feel like I can, because you've just proven to me that it's going to be a thing where I could be on board with it and it would completely change. It's like if you were watching Empire Strikes Back, and Empire Strikes Back ends with Leia and Han in established relationships. It's been built up. They want to rescue Han. Leia's going to go rescue him. And then Return of the Jedi is like, oh, hey, Han, while you were out, I actually got into a relationship with Jabba the Hutt. The director just really saw the chemistry for us. He really saw the connection there. And so he had to push it at all costs, because the world must see what the amazing chemistry of Leia and Jabba the Hutt is. Just, why would you guys, why would you do that? Why would you put a bad relationship that's obviously not going to work in your media? Why would you take the risk of destroying someone's immersion just to do that? But we're on the topic of bad ship relationships, and there is another bad ship relationship I want to talk about here. This one was pushed by shippers, but it's also one that the characters involved had to be changed in order to make work. And it's funny that I said at the top of the year I didn't want to talk about Harley as much in these videos, but here I go talking about her again. But hey, the channel is called JesterBell, so it's justified. But the relationship I'm talking about now is the relationship between Harley and Ivy. This one might be surprising because I think that there's a lot of misinformation around there to think that this relationship was always a thing when it wasn't. But let's talk about the history of that. So, contrary to popular belief, Harley and Ivy were not always in a relationship. They were not always super unrealistically, crazily affectionate for each other at all. That is a myth that has come up through false information. Harley and Ivy started because they had a 60-episode deadline to work out for Batman the Animated Series. Paul Dini came up with the idea that they would do a Girls on the Crime Spree episode, and they paired Harley and Ivy together as friends just because they thought that those were the most opposite characters that they could pair, and that there would be some interesting dynamic there. And that was the extent of that they thought of it. The idea that Harley and Ivy were always supposed to be in a relationship is false. If you go and listen to the original interviews with the people involved, they snicker about how they got away with so much innuendo when it came to Joker and Harley, but never say a thing about Harley and Ivy. They always talk about them in terms of friends. People say that Bruce Timm said he always intended them to be a couple, but that is not true. I have not read any interview anywhere with Bruce Timm where he's referred to them anything other than being friends.
About the only human being that she ever shows really any sign of affection for at all is Harley, and that's more just kind of like in a big sister kind of way.
Arlene Sorkin and Diane Pershing, who voiced the characters, said that they based their relationship off of their friendship. The person who tries to make it sound like he always intended Harley and Ivy to be a couple is Paul Dini, who, to be fair, did write that episode, but I'm not convinced he's being honest, because he only started doing that around 2015 in an interview that has now been taken down, but I heard it, and somebody asked him if they were ever intended to be a couple, and he went, oh, no, yeah, sure. That's what he said. But if you read Paul Dini's interviews, one moment he'll say that they were friends and that the relationship step came later. One minute he'll say that he always thought of them in a relationship but never did anything. In another, he'll say that he tried to insert something, but then his words on where that came in with the timeline of that always change. Paul Dini likes to go along to get along. Back when Harley and Joker were more popular, he said that, oh yeah, Joker really does love Harley. And then when they wanted to break them up, he was like, oh no, there was nothing between them. Paul Dini will go along with anything that they want to do with Harley. I love him as a writer, but that's just the facts of it. But the truth is, he never wrote Harley and Ivy as that affectionate of a couple. Actually, he was the guy who was pushing Ivy as being borderline abusive to Harley and a lot of stuff, condescending her with her words, being judgmental. The whole basis of this is that Harley and Ivy were just so affectionate and so obviously in love. Of course they were a couple, but that's just not the case. They were friends, and later on, through revisionist history, Paul Dini tried to claim that he always intended them to be a thing, even though his actual writing wrote them as the most antagonistic of any writers who handled them. Because Poison Ivy is a mass murderer, and she's not a good character. She's not very empathetic. The reason this relationship exists is because of shippers and because of the misconception that Harley and Ivy have a more affectionate relationship than they do. And DC, to their negative credit, tried to bait this relationship during the 2010s, and they were doing this with a lot of characters. They would say, Wonder Woman is a bisexual character, and then do nothing with it. Catwoman is a bisexual character. They've largely done nothing with that. What DC wants is they really want to get the headlines about characters being together, characters being LGBT. That's what they want. That is their corporate, cynical way of doing things. With Harley and Ivy, they also baited them throughout the 2010s, saying that they're actually girlfriends. They're just open about it, and then backtracking, saying that they're friends. But the truth of the matter is, DC never actually committed to having these two characters together. It wasn't until, I think, a big uproar over it came, where people who thought that these two were supposed to be this big couple noticed that DC DC wasn't really committed to it, and so there was a big uproar and screaming and bullying at DC, and the new Harley Quinn show that came out, or the not Harley Quinn show as I call it, so much screaming at them to do this relationship after Kaylee Cuoco did an interview saying that she had recorded the first half of the episodes and they hadn't done anything. So DC caved and did them in the relationship that they thought fans wanted. And so Harley and Ivy became this super, especially in the comics, this like super horny, sappy, drooling over each other constantly couple. And I can confirm this because I had to review those comics when I worked for a website that reviewed comics. Harley and Ivy is the worst relationship I have ever read about in comics. No competition. Why? Because what I've said, it's this constant fetishization of the relationship where it's so over sexualized to the point of just being exploitative, where Harley and Ivy cannot keep any sort of consistent characterization together other than drooling over each other, where Ivy has been turned into a completely different character. Well, characters, I should say. Sometimes she's just completely doting over Harley and accepting all the things she does, which is not who Poison Ivy is, because Ivy has to fill out this role that the shippers wanted of being this perfect girlfriend, while Harley, she's just kind of portrayed as this 6-year-old now. Like, I mean, this is me trying to explain characters who've become entirely inconsistent, but a lot of the times Harley is just portrayed as if she's straight up 6 years old with the way she talks and acts in this hyper-sexualized relationship that she and Ivy have, and it's so gross, but they push this in everything with them. Like, I used to forget Harley for a second. I used to love Poison Ivy, but that character, that eco-terrorist character, has largely been forgotten. She's just become Harley Quinn's girlfriend. She's just become this like idealized girlfriend character for Harley to have. And it's like, this is how you know that they were never a thing before, because their characters have completely changed to facilitate this relationship. But if you want to be a fan of either Harley or Ivy anymore and you don't like that relationship, well, you're up a creek, because it's shoved in everything involving them now. You can't get away from it. And that, I said Harley was was the most destroyed character of all time. This was just another layer to that. The kinds of comics that they put these two in that I cannot even describe because I'll probably get demonetized, but I'll just put it to you this way. Writers will use Harley and Ivy to just insert whatever fetish that they have. And that is part of the reason I quit reviewing comics, because I'm like, I don't want to read the writer's completely undisguised fetishes anymore. But this is another example of a relationship destroying characters I care about, because they just couldn't say no to these shippers. They couldn't leave well enough alone. They couldn't keep Harley and Ivy the consistent characters that they once were. No, because shippers wanted it and because they were convinced that this was a thing when it wasn't, they had to completely change them in order to do this relationship. And I'm just like, was it worth it? Just like with Joss Whedon, was it really worth it to do this relationship? Was it worth it to kill anyone's enjoyment of Age of Ultron just because or those characters just because you had to do the relationship? Was it worth it to push out any other potential fans of Harley and Ivy you might have to do this shipper fetishized version of their relationship because people yelled at you on Twitter or something? Once again, two characters were pushed away from what I knew them to be by a bad ship. So twice it happened. At least twice with characters that I really, really cared about. Obviously, there's other examples. So you can understand why when I was reviewing X-Men 97, why I was apprehensive and getting defensive about Magneto and Rogue from the start of that whole thing. Why? Well, a lot of people point out it's from the comics. It's from the comics. I'm going to shut down that whole it's from the comics thing right now. There are bad things in comics, and I'm going to give and I'm going to shut down the idea that anything that comes from the source material is therefore justified with this example. Do you remember a certain scene from the book called It? I'm not going to repeat what the scene is, but if you know what that scene I'm talking about is, you know it. And no one but nobody would ever think about justifying putting that scene in an adaptation whatsoever. There are some things in the source material that are bad and do not need to be adapted. The reason why I was getting defensive about Magneto and Rogue is because I recognized it as something that was similar to Bruce and Natasha, a forced ship, something that just didn't work, something that wouldn't fit. These characters, as I've said before, had nothing between each other in the 80s when and Rogue was portrayed as just a gangly 18-year-old, and they wouldn't, because the characters don't have any natural chemistry, and therefore no one was trying to put them together. It was only in issue number 274 of Uncanny X-Men that it was Jim Lee who got it into these head to sexualize Rogue with Magneto. And I say sexualize because really this cover that you see is the most action that they get out of this comic. It's in the comic itself, they're both depowered in the Savage Land and are on a team up, but nothing actually happens between them. Magneto recognizes a spark at one point. Rogue isn't really herself. He thinks to himself that he's not going to go through with it. He has more important things to do, and he leaves. And yeah, that was the basis for it. And comics have a lot of that. They have a lot of weird one-time flings and relationships or flirtations that just kind of come and go. But because a lot of people like the cover, and because I think because it was only a tease in this comic, it got it into some people's heads that somehow haughty, pompous, terrorist Magneto is going to go for the wiry, headstrong, loud, boisterous country gal Rogue, who's, yeah, 60 years younger than him. It was just an odd match. And like Black Widow and Hulk, they've tried to explain things to make them together. Like, oh, well, they were both villains, even though she was a groomed teenager and he is a full-blown, by his own admission, terrorist. That's not the basis of the relationship. The basis is Jim Lee wanted to sexualize Rogue with someone. Originally, that storyline, it wasn't supposed to be Magneto there. It was supposed to be Loki. Even the writer of it, who had to write it, said that Chris Claremont said that he didn't actually think that they would be a thing. He didn't see that for the characters. But believe it or not, these two characters never actually got together but once. It was only something that was brought up as a reference throughout the 90s. It happened in an alternate universe, which was supposed to be a hellish timeline where all the wrong things would happen. She had a love triangle with a DH clone of Magneto that went nowhere. She never actually got in a relationship with him. And then they abandoned the relationship for 10 years until the X-Men Legacy title, where Mike Carey, for some reason, decided to drum it up after all the times that Magneto had tried to murder Rogue and had attacked her and had done a lot of heinous things. And at one point, he made her overthrow Gambit using his own words, his own romantic words, to try to justify her relationship with Magneto, and got with him, which a lot of people just hated because it made Rogue look like a terrible person at that point for getting together with this guy who had done so many awful things. And what happened with the relationship then is they didn't actually have any chemistry or anything interesting about them, so they really didn't go anywhere. And about 10 issues later, as soon as the next writer came on, put them in a long-distance relationship, Rogue think, what am I doing with this person, and promptly get away from him because the relationship didn't work. And it made so little sense in it that the writer himself has admitted that it didn't make sense, and Marvel has tried to retcon it away from all kinds of things, saying that Magneto and Rogue were just affected by memories of an alternate universe. Rogue was just nervous about committing to Gambit, all kinds of things, because it didn't make sense for the characters. And it didn't happen in the original 90s show. Rogue was written as she was in the 80s there, and her relationship with Magneto was non-existent for those versions of the characters, because they wouldn't come together. But they had to retcon it in, and as someone who saw that it changed the characters in the comics when they tried to force it to happen, it changed the characters in the show to force it to happen. And I've already done enough ranting about how Rogue was changed, or how weird it was to see her all of a sudden mooning about Magneto's ideology for the future when she's never cared about that. And even in the 616 universe, they never had a relationship like that. It was made clear they've never ever agreed on ideology, which is why they can never be together. But they had to force it to get this relationship out there. And honestly, it made me not like Magneto's character either, because at least in the comics, they're kind of on equal terms, at least when they come together. But in the show, they made this weird smitten student got together with her much older teacher kind of relationship that her mom introduced to her to and dropped her off to live with for a while. It was weird, and honestly, when it first came up, I excused it, being like, they're just trying to create relationship drama. But the fact that they keep pushing it so hard, even harder than the 616 universe did, makes me think, along with things that the writer has said, that no, they just really like the idea of these together, and at least for the time being, they're going to milk it for all it's worth. The voice actor for Magneto said that they're going to continue doing it, or continue pushing it from a certain angle in the next season. And it's like, yeah, bye. Not watching that anymore. And I called it as soon as it was going to happen that it was going to change the characters, because it always had in the past whenever you force it. Just because you force something more than once doesn't mean that it isn't forced. There was a reason why this thing didn't work out in the X-Men Legacy. There was a reason why they had abandoned this relationship for 15 years. And even that was just a revisitation of it when it had been on for 10 years, and they never done this in media before. Also, I just want to point out that whole Magneto is the only one that can touch Rogue thing. That is something that they exclusively manufactured for this show. It's not in the comics. She didn't actually date him in comics until she had control of her powers. When she did try to steal his powers during the 90s storylines, she got overwhelmed because she couldn't handle it, but it confirmed her powers do work on him. In the alternate universe where she was married to him, it was because they both had the powers of magnetism. There is no comic universe or cartoon universe where Magneto can just automatically touch Rogue. In fact, the cartoons showed the opposite of that. So it was something they specifically manufactured for the show just to make up this relationship story, and yeah, it wasn't worth it. Honestly, it made their power dynamic even more messed up. But that is another thing that got wrecked, another character or set of characters that got wrecked by forcing a bad relationship. Even the voice actor for Magneto in interviews was like, yeah, he knew it would make them upset, and they were just like, uh-huh. So why did you do it? Why did you do it? No one likes this. No one, as praised as X-Men 97 is, no one likes that aspect of it. So why didn't anybody say no behind the scenes? It's another thing that damaged my enjoyment of two characters, that made me dislike them for this version. And you wonder, was that really worth it? But here is the point I want to make with this long video to people out there who are aspiring writers or who are writers right now. Forcing two characters to be in a relationship will absolutely ruin those two characters. If you have to change things about characters or versions of characters in order to get them in a relationship with each other, then that means that that relationship doesn't work. It means that you will ruin those two characters and who they are and derail their story, just as you're trying to force a relationship to happen, whether it's because it's your own personal insert relationship, or if you're just trying to appease shippers. Either way, don't do it. But what I want to close with is, why is this happening now? Because like I said before Black Widow and Hulk, I would have never seen that before. I had never seen an example of a relationship coming in out of nowhere like that and just wrecking two characters. And it's happened more than once in both media that I've cared about since then and media that other people care about. Why is it happening more now than ever? Is it because we have more comic book media? And like I said, comic books, there's so many of them. Sometimes there isn't much editorial oversight. Sometimes there's just weird relationships that come in and then are forgotten. It could be that, but I don't really think so. Is it because people aren't saying no at the right time? It's ironic we're at a time when there's very little risk-taking in Hollywood. At the same time, it seems like they're not saying no to things that they obviously should. I mean, that's obviously happening, but I really think it's this. It's that these days when it comes to relationships, they can't just be casual. They can't just be small things. You always have to go all the way with them. For example, there was a random relationship in the show Star Trek Next Generation with Worf and Deanna by the end of it, and even the actors said it didn't make any sense. They made them date a little bit, and they just kind of moved away from it because it made no sense, and they all said they were probably just trying to capitalize on the Beauty and the Beast craze at the time. But that was just a casual thing, and they could easily move on from it and forget about it. But no, with stuff like Black Widow and Hulk today, it couldn't be just Black Widow and Hulk are flirting up a relationship, and maybe they've got closer off screen. It still would have been out of nowhere, but no, it has to be Black Widow is throwing herself at the Hulk, and she wants to run away with him, and she wants to jump in the shower with him. Like, that's what I've seen with a lot of relationship writing these days. Like, the second two characters show an attraction to each other, if they do, because, you know, it seems that romance isn't done a lot, but when it's done now, it's done really bad. But the second two characters show so much as an attraction or an affinity for each other, bam, all the way. We're going all the way with it. And I think that a combination of all of that is why we're seeing more of it lately. It's like you have to go so far with the relationships each time. Like, Magneto and Rogue stuff, they didn't get together in the Savage Land. That's canonically confirmed, not just by Magneto's thoughts, but by the writers. But Had to do that in the show. They could have done the exact same love triangle without that, but had to go there. And Harley and Ivy is just ultimately a fetish relationship anyway, which is why it exists, and I wish people would acknowledge that. It's not a fun, healthy relationship. They're not even in a relationship, these characters that slobber over each other constantly and never have any real conflict. Everything needs to be pretend in this pretend perfect fantasy world of them. Even when they do have conflict, they have to pretend it doesn't exist. But I want to go back to my point is, if you have it in your head to do an awful relationship and that you think that you really have to force it to get together and you have to orchestrate all these things to explain why these characters would connect rather than just have them connect naturally, don't do it. It's not worth it. It ruins these shows, it ruins these comics, it ruins these movies, it ruins these books. Can you understand why I get a little upset now when I see that a bad relationship is coming along to ruin something that I care about? It's happened 3 times now. Stop it.
I'm Michael Jordan. Stop it. Get some help.
It's not worth it. Note to writers, don't destroy your good stories with your fetish relationships. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching. Do you have any of these instances where something that you enjoyed was destroyed by just a terrible relationship? Have you noticed it as I have, that it's happening a lot lately where it didn't before? Or am I just crazy? Is this the sort of thing that would always happen? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you, patrons.